presentations on urban expansion planning approach, on the financing. What do you think we should do when we go back to our respective cities?
Kampala, can you please still mute your microphone? And to all virtual guests that are online already, we said we would start at 1:30, but both teams on the ground in Addis and in Kampala, they need a few more minutes. They had discussions in the morning and they spent a little bit more of their lunch break to discuss. So they will convene in about 10 minutes. So please, please be patient. And for the teams on the ground, please keep your microphone still off and signal us when you are ready to start. Dear virtual guests, just to keep you informed, we will wait for another 5 minutes and then we start the program, because both the teams in Addis and in Addis Ababa, they had a longer discussion in the morning, so they are just returning from lunch. Thank you. Dear Sam, I see you're still speaking, but I hope we can now start the afternoon session, if that is okay with you, if you give me a nod. Perfect. Okay, good. Good afternoon, everybody, those who have joined us virtually today again, and a very warm welcome back to the delegations convening in Addis and to the delegations convening in Kampala in Uganda. We had a very engaged day yesterday. There was a lot of information and exchange of practices, which we have heard on day one, a lot of information for the 12 secondary cities that convene from Somaliland, Ethiopia, Kenya, and Uganda. And yesterday for the cities, it was also a lot about absorbing information. And this morning on day two, all the cities met in Addis and Kampala, and they discussed among each other with the respective line ministries on how they actually can roll out urban expansion planning in their respective cities. As you know, the Cities Alliance has already a collaboration ongoing. We started to work with 9 of the cities that are present today. And for them, this was a very important exchange of experiences and practices. Sam, I've seen you have already had a very engaged opening, and we have seen the pictures from this morning. It was a very energizing discussions we have heard. Could you just give us a very short soundbite on how the morning was and how the cities found it? Over to you, Sam, for a short impression, please. You're on mute, Sam. Now we can hear you.
Okay. Yeah, I would like to thank the participants in Kampala. They participated very actively in the discussions. We structured it in such a way that we could give each one of the participants an opportunity to contribute. And for that matter, we had two groups, group one and group two. And ideally, they focused on identifying the gaps in terms of policy, legal, institutional, and financial frameworks, and come up with proposals of how they can address those gaps and enhance the implementation of the urban expansion planning. We had the two groups were chaired by the president of the UAAU, who is the chairman of the Urban Authorities Association, and his vice, who is the vice chairman of the association. And the outcome of the discussions clearly have a backing of the two political leaders. I don't want to preempt what was discussed, because basically that is what the panel discussion will be about. But I would like to appreciate that both the political leadership participated in the discussions, and as well as the technocrats who are here. And we got the representation of the central government ministries, Ministry of Local Government and Ministry of Lands, Housing and Urban Development. And they have also made an input into the dialogue. Of course, one thing that came out vividly is that while we can come up with very useful recommendations and resolutions, but as long as we don't have a champion to take this forward, especially to the minister, to Parliament, then I think there is a gap there. So one of the recommendations was to, at the next round of dialogues, to invite the members of Parliament who represent the urban constituents to participate in these dialogues, and then also for two reasons: to be informed about what is going on, especially the importance of urban expansion planning, but also to get the recommendations, and then they can be able to take them forward to the floor of Parliament. So basically, that is in a nutshell, that's what came out from our discussions. The policy gaps, the legal gaps, institutional gaps, and financial gaps and recommendations are going to be presented during our panel discussions this afternoon. Thank you.
Perfect, thanks. Thank you, Sam, for this soundbite, and very interesting to hear the discussion about the involvement of the MPs as well. I think we will note this down. I would like now to just hear an impression as well from Addis Tsirigera, if you are there. Just give us a bit of feeling on how the tone of the discussion was this morning, and any key messages you want to take away. You're still on mute.
We have two groups, but the division of the two groups here was not according to the topics of discussion, rather, because we have the Somaliland delegation here. We had one group discussing on the institutional capacities and mandates of Somaliland cities, also broader context, and another group discussing the Ethiopian cities situation. So in the Ethiopian city situation, we had, fortunately, we had participants from the federal government, from the ministry, and from the regional government, as well as the cities. And in addition, representatives from the Ethiopian Civil Service University, who provided this link with the university and how the broader perspective of managing urban expansion should be addressed, particularly in terms of changing our, bringing a paradigm shift of how we should perceive, understand, and manage urban expansion. So that was very useful, also part of our recommendation. So the discussion on mandates reviewed the legal framework, principally in terms of legal framework, for example, what is already written in the prevailing laws and regulations, uh, also constitutional provisions for urban development. And that was reviewed whether it's implemented or not. It was discussed. Also, some frameworks and regulations that are supportive for urban expansion planning and implementation were presented from the ministry sides. And finally, we also discussed, or cities also reflected on experience of Ethiopian cities that already tried and attempted urban expansion planning, but always trying to differentiate the mandate issue and the experience or the practice issue, and the kind of creative solution they were able to utilize to complete the preparation of their urban expansion plans and to start implementation. Similarly, capacities, we had different kind of cities sitting on the table. We had Jijiga and Dredwa mainly. So in terms of manpower, they have different capacities, but also here we have seen the barriers as well as the opportunities and the current activities they are pursuing to enhance the institutional manpower and financial capacities. And finally, forwarded the recommendation on broader issues as well as specific issues on both aspects. I was not sitting in the Somaliland discussion, but the brief recap I saw, they had an extensive discussion. Now they are capturing in a PowerPoint presentation. So we decided to have two presentations, for one for the Ethiopian cities, another for Somaliland cities, still respecting the time limits and sharing our times accordingly.
Thank you very much, Sirida. Very, very happy to hear that in Addis you had the opportunity to have discussion from the local, regional, and national level, particularly as you were discussing the different mandates. So very happy to hear also back from the two speakers, both from Somaliland and from Ethiopia. With this, dear audience, now also from the virtual space, we have two dedicated sessions in the afternoon. We will start with hearing first back from Ethiopia, now also with Somaliland. We will after that have a brief Q&A session, and then we will continue and hear back from the Uganda delegation on their discussion in the morning. We will conclude with some final takeaways, which both Ethiopia and Uganda are going to present. These are short takeaways which show the way forward. As said, this regional dialogue does not stand alone in a vacuum. We are actually working with 9 cities across these countries, and we need to see how this regional dialogue also informed the way forward for the 9 cities to actually implement the approach. With this, I hand back the moderation to Addis, to Tingirtu from Chikchika University, to introduce the speakers for the first session in this afternoon. Over to you, Tingirtu.
Okay, thank you, Geti. Hello, everyone. Addis and Uganda, Kampala, and also participants from different parts of the world. This is an interesting session. We had a very interesting discussion this morning. As Gerida briefly said, we had 2 separate group discussions for the Ethiopian and for the Somaliland delegates. So we have decided to have 2 different, 2 separate presentations. The first presentation will be made by Mr. Semeter Feleka Dubai, who is a representative of Somali Regional Urban Governance Bureau. He is speaking on behalf of Dr. Abdi Fattah Bihi. Dr. Abdi Fattah was supposed to be here, but unfortunately due to other priorities, he sent the director for Urban Governance Bureau. So we have Mr. Semeter Feleka, who is going to brief us on as Gerida said, on the 2 most important thematic areas that we have discussed this morning, particularly on the capacity issue and on the mandate issue. Mr. Sameta, you have like 20 minutes to present. And also the second presenter will be Mohammed Amin Abdi. He is the mayor of Gabile. I will introduce him later on, but let me give the floor to Mr. Sameta first to give us the brief discussion.
Okay. My name is Samatar, as earlier our group is also discussing on the mandates and the capacities of cities on implementing and preparing urban plan expansion. Thus, we classify into categories. The first presentation is also on the implementation and the preparation mandate of cities. The next one is also in their capacity. The first one, mandate to prepare and implement urban expansion plans. The recognition of cities in the country's constitution is also for two chartered cities, and there's mainly emphasis for boradas, but not cities on the national constitution. Further, cities do not have a clear mandate to prepare urban expansion and also its implementation. In the country's urban development policy and urban plan regulation, stated that the cities have also the mandate to prepare case for the preparation and implement, approve the urban plans within their administrative boundary. Out of their administrative boundary, it requires also regional interference. For instance, in the case of Chichiga, the Chichiga City Administration is the capital for Somali regional state, and it have also the administrative boundary 15 kilometer, 15 kilometer, starting from the radius of the city in all direction. Thus, in this administrative boundary, the city has the power, duty, and the mandate to prepare, implement, case the preparation and also the approval of the plan. But out of the administrative boundary, it requires the regional interference. Further, the urban planning regulation gives provision for urban-rural linkage along with the urban expansion. And the Somali Regional State Urban Regulation states that urban centers have need for urban expansion out of their administrative boundary. There should be a committee established from the city administration and rural waradas, and also led by the regional. That ad hoc committees are also responsible to case the preparation and implementation of the urban plans out of the city administration boundary. In the mandate, there is a lot of maneuver at the regional level to facilitate to be granted for the city administrations. And the further lessons should be taken from previous cities and their practice that on the urban plan expansion, for instance, like Adama, Makale, and Awasa cities. We need to look beyond the official mandate of municipalities. Legal and contextual framework was also considered. In legal framework, for instance, for the implementation of urban plan expansion, it needs to be a directive to be also prepared and approved. Furthermore, some regulations need for revision. Okay. The second one is the city's capacity to prepare, implement urban plan expansions. We take in their capacities, the national capacities, in four categories. The first one is organizational arrangement and also structure. The next one is also professional and expertise. The third one is the equipment is need for planning and the survey, and the fourth one is also the finance for the preparation and implementation of the plan. Starting from the organizational structure, national structure, starting from the federal to regional and the city administrative is also well arranged. For instance, both in the case of Redwa and Chichiga, at city level, city service office, there is also a urban plan department, and at the sub-city level, also the urban plan office. Thus, the structural issue is also not an issue, and it's also well structured and arranged. In terms of professionals, Dredwa has a sufficient manpower to prepare expansion plans, but in case of Chichiga, there is a big gap of manpower in terms of quality and quantity. The existing manpowers are also lack experiences and they are not well competent. Capacity building training, thus in incapacitating them. Capacity building trainings are needed on specific urban planning and surveying, as well as planning softwares. Implementation of urban plan expansion need a much higher capacity. The third one is planning and surveying equipment. All cities have a critical gap in planning and surveying equipment, mainly differential GPS, surveying material like total station and hand GPSs, and also the gap in terms of vehicles to prepare, and also the implementation of the urban plan expansion. In terms of finance, finance is a critical problem in all Ethiopian cities, but similarly in Dredwa and Ejiga. Thus, their own revenue collection capacity and revenue base should be improved and also capacitated. Management and coordination of revenue-related institutions need attention to enhance their revenue generation and also revenue mobilization. The last one and the most important one is the role of academic vocational training institution in the preparation and implementation of planning expansions. Linkage between cities and academic vocational training institutions is important. This may require visiting the mandate of academic institutions also. Okay. Last, after we present the capacity and the mandate of city administration in urban plan preparation and expansion, preparation and implementation, we have to take some general issues and recommendations for to be way as forward. Ownership of by the ministries and also from regional level to city level, the political commitment is also important. How compensation payments are managed and they used by the recipients need further consideration, need to go hand in hand with livelihood development of people affected by urban compensation. Favorable revenue assignment to increase the revenues of city is also recommended. And autonomy of the city should be enhanced in terms of revising their tariffs and collecting their revenue and also service fees. A more creative financing system need to be put in place, and the strong stakeholders' participation should be. Community engagement is the most important one, consulting with the community, participating in the urban plan preparation and implementation, and also create their ownership of the urban and their consent of the community on the expansion area. When cities are located within a regional administration, there is a room for urban expansion. When they are bordered by other autonomous regions, or if they are charter city like in Dredwa, there is no room for expansion. A clear direction is needed from the Minister of Urban Development and Construction in this issue. Our presentation is in these two chapters, and the last one is also a recommendation. I will need to thank Sven also for suggestion and the questions. We will back. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Senator, for the brief presentation. Senator gave us a clear presentation on the mandate and the capacity of the Ethiopian city, and particularly he tried to give us some ground, some examples, practical examples from Dredwa and Jijiga cities. When it comes to the mandate, he said the Woredas are more mandated than the cities. the orders are recognized, but there is no clear mandate when it comes to cities. But the policy, the National Urban Development Policy, gives clear direction for cities to expand within the range of 15 kilometers. But when there are actually situations when cities falls between two different administrative regions, there is always a problem, conflict in terms of managing urban expansion. So there are several examples that are raised, including Addis Ababa. Cities like Dredwa, which falls between two regions, are sometimes very difficult when it comes to urban expansion planning. When it comes to the capacity, the organizational arrangements and structures are in place. That's very interesting. So in all cities in Ethiopia, like we have the institutional frameworks and that workable institutional frameworks. The problem we have capacity is like some cities they require insufficient manpower, while other cities don't have the sufficient manpower. Cities like Jijiga, for instance, have limited human power, but other cities like Dredwa are somehow in a better position when it comes to manpower. So we need to have like a kind of differential treatment of this kind of cities when it comes to manpower. But when it comes to the planning and surveying equipment, as mentioned by Senator, all of the cities in Ethiopia faces this challenge. The finance issue is critical for all of the cities in the country. This is what he has told us in his presentation and from the discussions we had this morning. So these are actually the main areas where to focus when it comes to capacity. He gave us also general recommendations, particularly the ministers and the political commitment and will is very important. And also compensation management for cities, particularly to manage urban expansions, is very important. The compensation issue has been a political issue in Ethiopia for the last 5 years and 10 years. We know how many there were different political chaoses in different parts of the city because of this compensation related issues. The revenue is also sometimes very difficult. I mean, some cities don't own the revenue. Increased autonomy is also recommended. Creating financing system and a strong stakeholder participation and community engagement is also addressed in this presentation. So thank you, Senator, for your brief presentation. Now I call upon Mr. Mohammed Amin Abdi. He is an elected mayor of Gabile, one of the most vibrant cities in the country. And Gabile is a city that generates income from agriculture and trade, and also it is responsible for in-kind custom on the border with Ethiopia. As we have heard from the mayor of Borama yesterday, cities in Somaliland have lots of influxes of people. As you know, Somaliland is hemmed between Ethiopia and Somalia, and also Puntland. So there is a mobility of people. There are lots of refugees and also labor migrants going to these cities. So it is interesting to hear from representatives of Gabile to tell us about their experiences in Somaliland. So, welcome, Mohammed, and you have 20 minutes.
Thank you. Excellencies, organizers and facilitators, and excellencies for distinguished guests. My name is Mohammed Amin Umar Abdi, Mayor of Gabile, one of the Somaliland delegation. I would like to share with you some information about the two cities, Gabile and Borama. The discussion focused on the capacity of the local institutions and the mandate, legal or otherwise, to deliver the service they are supposed to deliver. The need is focused mainly on human capital, infrastructure, equipment, and financial. In the discussion, we imagined how the rapid urban expansion plan can be managed, probably targeting to the next 25 years, reflected on the number of people who are expecting in terms of natural growth and rural urban migration. We agreed that for both cities, there is the need for more space, need more infrastructure, roads, allocate space for public and commercial areas. Both cities are growing fast and are among the 7 cities of A-level category of the country, and they want to compete with the world cities, so space for green area, sports, and other public spaces, better management of the traffic are among the area we are working on. This needs more planning ahead to be put in place. The two cities are share the character of being surrounded by agriculture area, and land is owned for centuries by private people. The constitution in Somaliland states that the land belongs to the state, but the land is the hand of peoples. However, when there is a need, a privately owned land will go back to the public through compensation. Sometimes the municipality needs money to exchange the land and relocate the owners in another place for urbanization. Existing realities. On the mandate, legal-wise, the two municipalities have the same role and mandate as all municipalities. The local government has the mandate of land management, planning, assigning for land usage within the urban area, as well as collecting revenue, different types. The master plan, however, should be approved and agreed with the National Public Planning Committee headed by the Ministry of Public Works, with other stakeholders like Ministry of Water, Ministry of Communication, and Ministry of Environment. The local council deliberates and votes for the request of master plan and sent to the National Public Planning Committee for approval. The local council mandates to the executive branch of the municipality, which consists of the mayor, the deputy mayor, and the secretary of the council for implementation. Master plan for Boroma and Gibili. Gibili has already master plan approved and agreed and working on the zoning for implementation, while Boroma has the master plan approved but to be implemented in 2021. Current formal financial income, major income for finance to the municipalities from revenue collection, taxes on licenses for business, registration fee, land tax income, tax on local business, but also support from the unified income tax, like subsidies among the municipality where the central government collects tax on major parties, customs, and redistributes in quarterly manner. Proposed and pilot financial income, as more income generation, both municipalities in Boroma and Gibili are implementing as pilot to build small rooms for business and people, by rent for usage, to build by fee parking, and buy land for government farming in agriculture. That's pilot project. Services offered by the municipality, like major services provided by the local government, including sanitation and hygiene, like garbage collection, maintenance of roads and beauty of the city, mother and child health, and other basic health services, provide electricity and other bills to the schools, mosque government structures, and also provide schools like extension and repairing, supporting local police stations, supporting public schools, financial infrastructure. According challenge on surface providing, the challenges here include that the fund allocated by the central government is not fully passed to the local government, and despite on the paper there is a support from the center, however, the local government takes the burden on its shoulders. Challenges and proposed solution issue on the mandate. The municipality is fully independent for zoning, mapping, and design for the urban planning as stated in the legal framework, which is quite good on the paper, but sometimes it happens that the ministry, on behalf of central government, interferes the use of land. There is a need to fully implement the decentralization process. Somaliland recently accepted policies need to be executed. Financial recompensating plus awareness. Sometimes the local government can cover the cost needs and sometimes require a support from the central government. There is also a need for awareness creation, which demands financial capacity for implementation. People uprising and escalation of conflict. When the political and policing power is beyond the local government, for example, if people refuse to leave the space, the government of the region is involved, and so the central government support is in the execution. Another challenge, conflict resolution. The municipality needs to improve the capacity of their staff and personnel to resolve land dispute, which is a big issue in Somaliland. Sometimes the local government is not able to justify the ownership claims because of the documentation that has been lost in the past. Another challenge, rapid urban expansion, unplanned settlements. IDBs settle unplanned area, and this is continuing problem also because recently the draft refuge and internally displaced people are becoming more and more for the climate change. Another challenge, human capital capacity in the management. People who are working at the municipality need capacity building for planning and for conflict resolution. There is a need to build capacity for the personnel of the municipality, not only for upcoming young generation of planners, but mainly and mostly in the job expertise that need to be empowered, like on job training. Types of expertise needed include general knowledge for public works, the equipment, computerized system, GPS, IT knowledge gap. Institution memory, political interface is one of the challenges. The mayors change in every 5 years, and for political reasons, the change may affect people who are working the technical side. We need to improve here distinguishing the political assignment for civil servants. Capacity of revenue collection. It is estimated that the revenue collection capacity is 30% of expected real collection. Reason being the capacity of the personnel to collect, lack of statistics, awareness of population, of willingness to pay taxes, as well as the approach to the tax collection. Lack of reliable statistics. Municipalities have no numbers of households as well as defined population. For instance, estimation for population in Boroma, 180 to 200,000, while in Gibile, 105,000, but these figures have not yet a reliable study behind. There is a need for capacity building institutions in statistics. Yes. Technical for institutional memory and record management is also another challenge. There is a need for new technology to get involved in the urban plan, land ownership management. Many offices still use the manual archiving system, and this creates a problem. Yeah. That's all. Thank you very much. Thank you for your attention.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor Mohammed Jamin Abdi. Just briefly, I think the challenge, when it comes to mandates, there are some clear mandates in Somaliland than even the cities in Ethiopia. Municipalities are somehow independent to zoning, mapping, and delineating the boundary of the city. That's very interesting, somehow different. But still, when it comes to master planning, they still send the master plan to be approved to the national government. The rest of the things are somehow similar with the context in Ethiopia. When it comes to capacity, we have all the structures are there, also institutional frameworks are also there in Somaliland. The same for the Ethiopian cities. But when it comes to human resource, financial, technical, and when it comes to equipment, so there are challenges in Somaliland as well. So this works for all the cities. Capacity of the municipal execution is also different in some parts of the cities in Somaliland. But the IDPs and the refugee issues are also very important in Somaliland because it triggered irregular settlements, and that also brings the issue of compensation, particularly when we try to adopt a new simple planning approach in these two cities. So the issue of compensation also works for the cities of Somaliland as it does for the Ethiopian cities. Revenue collection and administration, lack of reliable data. I think the data issue is also it works for the Ethiopian cities as well. We just estimate, we don't have actually official numbers of settlements in many of the cities in Ethiopia. And it also equally works for the cities in Somaliland. What we don't have from the Somaliland presentation is like, he didn't give us the recommendations. Maybe I expect later on the mayors to reflect on what do they recommend. On they have mentioned all the challenges, but the recommendations, we'll see the recommendations later on. Now we will go to the question and answer sessions. Brigitte, may I give it back to you or? Okay.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much, Tingitu, for moderating this session. Thanks a lot for the speakers, Samata from the regional government in the Somali region in Ethiopia. And thank you very much to the mayor of Gabiley. You had a very straining travel to Addis. We are very happy to have you on board. And we are looking forward to actually coming to Somaliland next week, where we can a bit discuss in more details the situation on the ground. The key message again for me from both presentation was it has to be locally relevant. What we can do today during these 2 days is to exchange experience. And these experiences are actually applied. So we have many cities who already went through the experience and can offer what they have learned. But it then is up to the respective city to see, does this fit our local context? Does this fit our reality? Both in terms of HR, of financing, and of the political context. Another key takeaway, and we already have one question here from the audience, the virtual audience, is, so what does that have to do with the rural to urban migration? We have heard yesterday morning, it was the commissioner of Uganda presenting the 3 major drivers of urban growth. And this is rural to urban migration, this is natural growth within the city boundaries, and that is also an expansion of the city boundary, which we experience now in Uganda. Now, as we have heard now from Samatar and also from the mayor in Gabilei, the cities have the right to plan for their jurisdiction, for their boundaries. Thing is that these boundaries do often not comprise the actual area of the city as it is today. This is the reason why 15 municipalities in Uganda have been upgraded to city status now. Previously, their jurisdiction, their boundary was rather small. It did not represent anymore all the people that live there. And many of the people that live there are rural urban migrants that have settled outside the boundaries. But the city does not have the mandate to plan for them. Now they do in Uganda. There are already 4 or 5 cities that already started planning for the much larger area, which comprises this new population as well. And there's where we have the connection of this driver of urban population growth. I'd like to hand over now to the moderators in Addis and also in Kampala. Please collect 1, 2 questions, and then I will also be happy to invite Patrick, who joined us from New York, very early in the morning in New York. He joined us, and hello Patrick. We will hear from him in the Q&A session as well to give us an impression of what he has. So over to Alex first, please. One question from.
Yeah. Questions.
Thank you. Thank you. My name is Bashir from Jijiga University. Actually, I was just following till yesterday about some of the issues and challenges related to some of the municipality, which is especially related to the legal framework, especially the land management and the ownership of the land. Some of the points which I want to raise is, for example, in the Somali regional state, and when I see some of the Gebele and Aboroma, I think the culture is a little bit different from the other part of the Ethiopian society. In legal framework, the land in Ethiopia is owned by the government, but in reality, I think, especially in the Somali regional state, it is belong to the people. So I think when we come to the land issue management, we have to focus on the elders of the clan society. So the clan elders have the powerful. So I think when we come to the city alliance, I think it's better to focus on the elders. That is one of my issue which I want to get some feedback. When we see the institution, the municipality issue, actually, we know that there is a turnover issue. Today of 1 year, you can get a number of top management, and then next year you never get it. So when we come to the institutional memory, especially some of the technologies, still we are lagging behind of some parts because the technology of especially some of the municipalities is very poor, or they are just accessing everything as manual. So they need some kinds of management necessary to retain this institutional memory in the municipality. When some top management will be changed, the newcomers, they have to get some of the data of the previous decision makers. I think the other awareness creation is very important issue, especially in the land management and especially in the city expansion. So our society, they are not aware what is going on. We have to get they have to get some information which is related about the land and the benefit if they get some kinds of infrastructure and roads and so on. So this is also very important. About the reliabilities and the statics, I don't want to say something, but one of the most important thing that I can observe with the whole of the municipality is that, system of resource management. System of resource management. I have some experience in Jijiga municipality, and then there is a number of resource embezzlement actually. The issue, actually we know that the income, some amount they are getting from the government external resource, but the most income is internal. And that is what we have to focus it, because internal revenue needs a system of collection first, and then a system of management. So internal revenue management always needs a collection system which they can adopt it. So do you have any mechanisms, actually, this is my question actually, any mechanism related to capacitate or give some kinds of training in order to get some kinds of improvement in the revenue collection issue? That's my consideration. Thank you.
Any other question?
If we don't have another question, we would move over to Kampala to collect the question from the audience there.
Cornelius, put up your hand, please. Yeah. All right.
Thank you very much.
Yes, go ahead.
I have one question on the first presentation about the mandate and capacities. Clearly in the presentation, it was presented that one of the mandates was to plan for the rural-urban linkage. But also in the recommendation, it was recommended that communities must be intensively engaged if we are to achieve urban expansion planning. Now my question is, what was the functional relationship between the urban and rural local authorities before and after the implementation of the urban expansion planning? This will help us to pick the good practices and avoid potential challenges. Thank you.
Thank you, Cornelius. This is actually an excellent question, and it also brings us back to remember that these 2 days are specifically to talk about urban growth, but growth driven by rural to urban migration. I see there's one more question coming from Kampala. Please, over to you.
Yes, thank you very much. I just want, as a sort of addition to his question, to understand more to what extent have the communities been engaged in this subject of urban planning as we undertake it. Because I heard in his discussion, he says there is inclusiveness of the community as they plan. Just to add more, a little bit of it, to what extent and probably how, the how part of it. Thank you.
Thank you. This was Sarah.
Thank you, Sarah.
Yeah. Sarah, thank you very much. For the audience virtually and in Addis, Sarah is representing Act Together, which is a slum dweller federation in Uganda. She represents the community in the cities which experience firsthand the challenges from urban growth. I would like to give the floor for a few minutes to Patrick. You all have seen yesterday in the morning session Patrick's presentation. We have shown you the video of the work in the first phase of the urban expansion in Ethiopia. We are very happy that Patrick joined us today in the morning. Patrick, of the questions that just came now beyond your overall reflection and feedback, I think what is interesting of Mr. Bashir from Chichiga University is again the reminder of thinking of revenue systems. I think yesterday Tsirigera made a really astonishing and excellent presentation in showing so many options on how a city and municipality can generate revenue. And the second point, which came up from all three speakers now, from Bashir, Cornelius, and from Sarah, is actually the community engagement. And Cornelius linked this also with the engagement of the communities and authorities in the urban and rural space, because we will, with the urban expansion planning, go beyond the boundaries of the city jurisdiction. So over to you, Patrick.
Wonderful. Thanks so much to everyone for this really excellent meeting. And thanks especially to the Cities Alliance for organizing it. But for me, I have to say, attending this remotely from New York, it's really remarkable to see the kind of regional knowledge exchange that's taking place. To my knowledge, this is the first meeting of its kind. Like, to my knowledge, this is the first time that we've had a group in Kampala, a group in Ethiopia, and international participants. And I think, considering that this attempt is going on in the middle of a crazy pandemic, and that we're trying to do something that's extremely ambitious, and that we're managing different systems from Ethio Telecom to, you know, whatever it is I'm using here, I'm very impressed. So thanks everyone for your participation and patience with the process. I think this is very worthwhile. Thanks as well to the speakers, and particularly to our most recent questioners for asking such difficult and interesting questions. I'd just like to echo Brigitta's point and also the points of Sigaretta from yesterday, and say that, and this ties in with the way that we engage with the community as well. You know, I think as municipal authorities or regional authorities, it's easy for us to understand this investment that we're being asked to make in urban expansion planning as cost. It's easy for us to see the expenditure side of the balance sheet, especially in terms of compensation cost, infrastructure cost, and sometimes maybe we lose ourselves a bit and forget that when it comes to urban expansion planning, we really are mainly focused on securing the arterial road corridors. So in most of our cities, this amounts to a few hundred hectares of land that need to be secured. The thing that makes that land so valuable for us is that it's linear. So it's easy to get lost and only see the expenditure side of the balance sheet, but we should remember that this process of growth is something that allows us to implement new revenue collection systems. And key to doing that is making sure that as land is being developed, we are also updating cadasters, that we're engaging in property tax collection, especially there's a tendency to want to get everything right before we even start. And what I would just like to say is, it's much easier to set up an effective property tax collection system or revenue collection system in the areas that we're developing from scratch, a piece at a time, because we can go into that with a clear sense of how the titles are working. We can go into that with clear information about who the owners are. So you could imagine engaging in some revenue generation that's really mainly focused on the newly developed areas, because that's where we have the information and the capacity to actually manage it. So these new expansion areas can actually become the main revenue engines for the city that give you the resources to go back into the core and then update your property tax collection systems there, which is much easier than going into areas that are already developed and trying to build a collection system from scratch. So that's one thing to keep in mind, is that this is also an opportunity. So 2 points on revenue collection. When we're thinking about compensation and land development, we need to think about the problem that we're actually trying to address, which is the problem of the arterial roads, which is a much smaller problem than the problem of developing the macro blocks. That problem we tackle through other means. You know, that problem we tackle through existing channels or other innovative mechanisms. And then the other point is we should get into a mindset of understanding this growth process as a revenue positive for our cities. And as we're structuring these projects, we need to make sure that that's true, because I think it's easier to go to the regional government or to go to the national government and request some capitalization for an investment, which is going to pay off, than it is to go to the regional government or to the national government and request something more like a grant, which is never going to generate any new revenue. So that should be our mindset. And this comes back to the idea of the revolving fund. Now, I said that this ties in some way with the question of community engagement. So community engagement on the topic of urban expansion planning is kind of interesting because we know, or at least maybe we know, I think I said it in the recorded presentation, but allow me to reiterate. Cities are growing very fast right now, not only in terms of population, but also in terms of land area. So in Ethiopia, we're facing a 5-fold increase in urban population, which translates into a 7-fold increase in area in the next 30 years. Now, what does that actually mean? That means that the existing population of your city is only 20% of the population that you'll be dealing with in 2050. That's what that means. So that means that 80% of the people who will live in your city in 2050 aren't available to be consulted. They either haven't been born yet, or they're still living in rural areas. They have not yet migrated to cities. So the question of how you manage consultations is really an important one, because many of the people who will actually live in these newly developed areas are truly not available to be consulted with. So what do? You have to consider then the question of who will be directly impacted, who you can access. So that means speaking to the people whose lands are going to be crossed by the arterial road corridors, the communities that are already engaged in urban expansion planning. Now, I think this is maybe sort of a fallacy, again, that comes from the perspective of sitting in the municipality, or in my case, like sitting in a university. The fact is, we know from the data that the urban growth that's taking place in cities in Uganda and in cities in Ethiopia and in cities in Somaliland right now is community-driven urban expansion. That's what's actually happening right now, because it's happening through informal processes. It's being driven by natural increase, it's being driven by boundary expansion, but critically, it's being driven by rural to urban migration, which is a community-based process as people move from their rural areas to cities, connect with networks of people from their tribes or groups, and settle in informally developed areas, right? We know that 3/4 at least of the growth that's taking place is taking place through informal development. Again, this is a community-led process. This is people who are trying to improve their lives by moving to cities, who are working with local farmers to develop informal settlements legally, illegally, by whatever means they have available. So let's just understand that what we're actually doing here, the work that we're actually doing, is we are involving ourselves in an ongoing community-led process and attempting to use our authority and our knowledge to make that a process that has longer-term sustainability. Because as these rural to urban migrants are moving to cities, we need to make sure that the kinds of communities that they're living in and the way that they're settling in the cities eventually leads to them becoming integrated into the city in terms of jobs, access to services, healthcare, and if not them, then their children. So that means designing areas in a way where they can be upgraded and integrated, and where we eventually have one city population, not a formal population and an informal population, which was seen when similar processes took place in Latin America, where because of a lack of good urban expansion planning, these community-driven processes accommodated a lot of people, but in a way where it's taken them generations to actually become integrated into the city. That's what we're trying to avoid. So in a way, that means that our task is both like much bigger and also much smaller, because as we've discussed, the interventions that are needed in order to do that right now are really fairly simple. It's about setting aside land for arterial roads so that we can provide infrastructure in the areas that develop, and setting aside land for public open spaces. So I think that what does that give you when it comes to community engagement? Well, what it means is you can talk about urban expansion a little bit differently. So you can talk about expansion with the farmers and with the communities that are engaged in informal land development, and you can talk about it as something that is additive to the process that they're already doing. It improves the access to their land. It improves the way that communities are being developed right now. And in that way, rather than having an antagonistic situation where you say, okay, we want to change everything that you're already doing and put it into this new framework, you say, what we want to do is bring in our resources as the municipality to take what you're doing and help you do it better. That's what we have to do, because the magnitude, again, of the challenge is such that we're not able to stop the process that's going on. We need to kind of understand what's already going on our peripheries and roll with it and try to enhance it. So these are my thoughts on that. Somewhat non-specific, but thank you.
Many thanks, Patrick. We are happy that you got up early today and to join us. And I think your comments were very specific. I particularly appreciate this perspective, or more this reminder that this is actually a community-driven process. It's driven by the people that come to the city, that live in the city. This is something Julian also reminded us yesterday in his presentation, when he showed the differences between what we wish for in terms of planning and what is actually the reality, while we are planning for it. With this, I would like to give back the floor to Sam. I would like to open now the session in Uganda, in Addis. And Sam, please take over the moderation. We are happy to hear from the participants what you discussed in the morning session. Over to you, Sam.
Thank you very much, Brigitta. Good afternoon, colleagues. Yeah, this is the panel discussion with the audience, with the participants in Kampala. We have two panel discussants, but before we go to to the panel discussions, I will of course invite the two panelists to come and join me here. I'll introduce them appropriately. So can I invite Mayor Majid to come and join me here, and also Mayor Wilson Sanya. You can take the seat, and you can take this one. So we are going to combine this session. His Worship, Mayor Majid will give us the outcome of the discussions this morning, and that we shall just move straight into the panel discussions. So I'd like to introduce His Worship, the Mayor of Jinja, who is the President of the Urban Authorities Association of Uganda. His profile is in the booklet, but he's very eloquent, and he's very professional in matters of urban management. And I would say that he's a champion. He's championing the cause of the cities. And for your information, he has been a mayor of Jinja City, and now he's vying to go to represent the city of Jinja in the Parliament of Uganda, to be a champion at that level. So So if you cannot give him a vote, pray for him.
Thank you.
I will introduce His Worship, the Mayor of Koboko, later when we begin the panel discussions. So, Your Worship, Mayor Majid, you can give us the feedback from the discussions that we had in the Kampala dialogue. Thank you so much. You're welcome.
Thank you very much, Sam, for those very kind remarks. We had a discussion this morning in two different groups. We had group 1 and we also had group 2. We broke up in these two different groups, but we had to come up with recommendations on key reforms needed to facilitate urban expansion planning. Now, the background to this is quite clear that one, Uganda is a developing country. And we know that if we're going to develop Uganda into a middle class or first class country, we will need to address the issue of urbanization. We are cognizant of the fact that there is not a single country in the entire world that has developed without urbanization. We also note that the most developed countries in the world are also the most urbanized. We also said in the morning that the world has already crossed the threshold where more than 50% of the world's population is living in urban areas. And we know for sure that urbanization is a phenomenon that is irresistible, that is facing us today. And we have to deal with it one way or the other. And for us to facilitate urbanization, and urbanization that is resilient, that is sustainable, that is also inclusive and livable, we feel that it needs to be planned. But we also know that in our current situation, we need key reforms in order to facilitate this urban expansion planning. And these are what we looked at. We looked at the legal framework, and we said, under legal framework, we looked at the Physical Planning Act, and it doesn't factor in the urban expansion. Earlier in the morning, we had Sam here who told us about the new urban policy that talks about the limits of urbanization, the limits of the development of cities. But we say that the Physical Planning Act needed to be reformed, needed to be amended so that it factors in urban expansion. And two, we also looked at the issue under legal framework, that is housing and slum upgrading and land densification. Now, we're very much aware that in the developed countries, shelter now is considered a human right. If we're gonna do development, if we're gonna do urban planning, if we're not going to do sustainable and planned urbanization, then we need to address the issue of housing. That is the provision of affordable housing for the populace. And the solution that we came up with here was to spur land densification through public-private partnerships. That is government to partner with private developers by embracing the PPP approach. Urban centers need to have guidelines and standards that will help the people to relocate naturally. Then three, we looked at public finance management systems under the legal framework. And this is what we said, that presently all local revenue has to be remitted to the center for further disbursement. Basically, all the revenue that is collected in the urban authorities must be remitted to central government, to the consolidated fund. And it then has to be requisitioned. Cash limits have to be issued for the local authorities, the urban authorities, to be able to spend these monies on service delivery. And we thought that this is an anomaly that needs to be amended, needs to be dealt with as soon as possible. And we called for the amendment of the Public Finance Management Act, that is the PFM Act, to give financial autonomy to urban authorities, that is the cities, municipalities, and town councils, enable them carry out their mandate. We also thought of urban authorities should have deliberate business enabling laws, manage businesses, which will in turn enable councils to manage expansion programs. We looked at amendment of laws to ensure a percentage of corporate tax is retained in the urban authorities or sent back to the respective authorities. And we propose that the percentage should be based on productivity of a given urban area. Basically, what we're talking about here is a change in the allocation formula of grants that are coming in from central government. What we are saying that if one area has got a number of factories that are paying huge amounts in corporate tax to the central government, all this money should not just end up at the center, but the local urban authority should retain a small percentage of that, maybe 2.5 to 3%, so that they can deliver services to these taxpayers. Otherwise, you're going to have a gap where the tax generators, the companies that are paying these corporate tax, actually not getting the services that they require in return. So we're calling upon our government to change the allocation formula, in addition to the factors that they consider allocating these funds, like poverty index, population, area. They should also factor in the productivity of that particular area and allow that particular area to retain a percentage of that corporate tax so that they can cater services tailored to the needs of that particular area. We also looked at operationalization of the urban policy. We say that this requires a law and a budget. Uganda has already formulated an urban policy, which is yet to be properly disseminated to the entire community. But we're also saying that it requires a law and a budget that will allow for sensitization, raising awareness, disseminating it to all concerned stakeholders. Then a deliberate policy on the metropolitan growth of urban areas. We recognize the fact that most of the areas that, for example, have now been granted or city status have been created as cities, also are neighboring other urban areas. For example, in my own city, Jinja is now a new city, but we also know that neighboring Jinja is another municipality called Njeru, and the two are close to each other. So you cannot develop Jinja in isolation of Njeru. That means that you need to create metropolitan planning areas such that the development of a city is integrated with the development of the neighboring metropolis. So we are proposing the creation of metropolitan planning areas for purposes of planning and urbanization. A deliberate policy on metropolitan growth for urban areas should be introduced. And for example, when you look at the capital city of Kampala, we have seen that Kampala is developing at the expense of the neighboring areas. The resources and a lot of finance is focused on the capital city, Kampala. Yet you cannot really you cannot develop Kampala in isolation of the neighboring municipalities of Jira, of Nansana, of Entebbe, and others. So the solution to this is to have a greater Kampala metropolitan planning area that will take into consideration not just Kampala as a city, but it also takes into consideration the neighboring towns and municipalities because they all feed into each other and you cannot develop one in isolation. This is what we're talking about, that we should have a metropolitan planning area that caters for the city and also its environs. Of course, taking into consideration the limits of expansion so that you can have a green belt beyond which you cannot develop. Next page, please. Oh, before that, policy framework. Now, on the policy framework, one, we are proposing that we should have a PPP policy, that is public-private partnership policy. And we're saying that currently rural to urban migration cannot be deterred, but cities need to undertake advanced planning to ensure that there are facilities to attract the rural population and accommodate them in an acceptable manner so that they too can enjoy the facilities and the resources of a city and the increased standard of living that cities will offer. So we're proposing under the PPP policy, we're proposing the following: that develop guidelines for PPP to ease its implementation. There is need to localize the approach to PPPs in the cities. We already have the PPPs, but people have already noted that it is a very cumbersome law, that it is very bureaucratic, and that it's very difficult to implement. So there is a need to redress it so that it's it matches with the needs of the local communities. Two, we are talking about include the neighbors in the physical planning and develop neighborhood concept, deliver capacity building interventions on PPPs. That means that we need to educate our people. We need to impart knowledge on the PPPs. We need to operationalize. Operationalization of the urban policy requires a law and a budget. We've already said that. And a deliberate policy on the metropolitan growth for urban areas. Urban enforcement police, this is under policy framework. Urban enforcement police is required to create order in the urban areas. And I need to say something about this, that we note that Uganda as a country, it has been said that it's got some of the best policies and laws on paper. But when it comes to implementation, we find that we are lacking on implementation. And the urban authorities in particular have got very good physical planning regulations. We know where the residential areas are, where the commercial, the industrial, the open spaces. But we find that very often these regulations are flouted and with impunity. And we've also noticed that most of the enforcement departments that we have in the cities and municipalities do not actually have the capacity to enforce physical planning regulations or guidelines. So what we're therefore saying that since we have the national police, that they should create a unit within the police, which will be called the Urban Enforcement Police, under the National Police Force, to assist the local urban authorities with enforcement and implementation of physical development guidelines. And we believe that when this is done, it will go a long way in creating order, okay, in these cities. So have an urban law to cater for all levels of urban areas. That's an urban, include betterment levy in the Physical Planning Act, reducing on the PPP red tape, which inhibits potential investors. I've already talked about that. Regulation of existing transport systems, that is border borders, matatus, okay? And also on this, we need also to say something about the transport system, that you cannot, we all know that urban areas have large concentrations of people in the areas. And we know that these people need to be moved from their residences to their workplaces. So you need to address the issue of mass transit systems or mass transportation systems. Now, in a city like Jinja, a city like Kampala, even a city like Mbale, the greatest number of people will walk to work because they don't have vehicles and they also don't have buses. The next biggest percentage will use border borders. Following that, we have the matatus, the mini buses. But we are saying that we need to integrate the transport systems by, first of all, regulating the existing transport systems that we have. You cannot have border riders that are unregulated. We need to know them, we need to register them, we need to know where they operate from. So this is what we are talking about, that we need regulation of the existing transport systems, border borders, matatus, etc. But beyond that, we're also calling on central government to invest in the infrastructure for mass public transit systems, similar to what we have seen in the neighborhood areas, for example, in Tanzania, where they've already introduced the BRT. In Nairobi, we have now trains that have now been introduced, and they're helping a great deal with the mass transportation. We talked about creation of poverty eradication schemes for the urban areas. That is where you deliberately target the unemployed by identifying their skills, areas that they're interested in, training them, okay, equipping them with entrepreneurial skills, equipping them with vocational skills, giving them certificates and supporting them with startup capital so that they can become job creators as opposed to job seekers. One of the biggest challenges facing Uganda and the developing world in particular is the huge numbers of unemployment, especially of the youth who end up loitering in the cities and they become prone to all sorts of mischief. So we are thinking about an urban poverty eradication scheme and ways in which we can support the Juakalis. We then address the issue of institutional framework. Working in silos at LG city level, environment is taken as a separate from physical planning. This is the current situation. The community is not aware of the secondary cities and what it means to them. Therefore, there is need to engage the citizens in planning and development of the cities. Currently, there is no specific budget for the urban expansion and to factor it into the BFP. For cities with USMID funding, USMID is Uganda Support to Municipal Infrastructure Development. They can utilize some of that money to plan for the periphery of these cities. So what we are proposing that we should provide some funding for urban expansion. We are proposing that urban enforcement policy is required to create order in urban areas, creation of fully functional physical planning and land management department. At the moment in our urban authorities, we already have the physical planning, but has been stated earlier that they are actually tucked under the engineering department. So we want to have a physical planning department and land management department as an independent department on its own, considering the importance of physical planning in urban expansion programs. Then utilize participatory planning processes at all levels. We've been talking about inclusivity in all our planning so that nobody is left behind. Planning of regularization of area settlements to cater for ulterior services. This was informed by the fact that there are people that have already settled on pieces of land that we may want to replan. And one of our participants here, Sarah, talked about post-eviction resettlements. That how do we deal with people that have just been evicted? How do we resettle them? And this is what we're saying, that we need to regularize area settlements to cater for these ulterior services. Integrated public urban transport system using bus rapid system. We've already seen that it works. It's been introduced in Dar es Salaam, and it's also working well in Johannesburg, especially in the areas of Soweto and the others. We also need to plan for trams to be adopted as a means of transport through PPPs, where the government can provide the infrastructure, but then we invite on the private sector to invest in the rolling stock. Of course, trams also use the normal roads, so they can alternate. The roads, the vehicles, the cars, and the trains are using the same road. And we feel that owing to our current development, the trams will probably be a very good way to go, obviously with the trains, as we've seen in the city of Nairobi. Then developing capacity of the city in generation of data for future projections. Now, I need to say something about this. One of the biggest failures of development, and Sam has talked about this, is the lack of data. That if you visit any of the cities, any of the municipalities, and you ask specific statistical data on any particular subject, you're going to find that your technical officers are going to struggle to give you reliable data on that particular subject that you might be inquiring about. Even something as simple as roads. How many kilometers do you have? How wide are they? What's their usage, traffic usage? Things like that are going to take an eternity. And the reason the situation is like that is because we have not collected enough reliable data. We have not developed information systems that will base on to project our future needs. So we are absolutely saying that if we're going to develop, we need to plan. Okay, if we're going to plan properly the urban expansion, we need to have reliable data on all sectors affecting the urban areas. So development of data and projections are absolutely important to allow for urban planning expansion. Then next is urban, we've also said that the urban policy is not well understood and implemented. I've already said a little bit of that it requires urban planning. Yes, Uganda as a country has now developed an urban policy, but you'll find that it has not been disseminated. A lot of people are not aware. So we need to raise awareness, we need to sensitize, we need to disseminate it. Next page, please. And next we talked about the financial framework. And the situation at the moment is that local revenue, as I've already said, collected was initially at local government level, but is now being collected by the central government that just issued directions where most of the revenue has to be collected by the Uganda Revenue Authority. Okay, that is the situation as is at the moment. And we are proposing that the central government should give guidelines enabling cities and municipalities to collect and spend revenue collected. Now, in the early 90s, Uganda adopted the policy of decentralization, where we thought that this is the best way of taking services closer to the people, services closer to the community. And we thought that by giving a little powers, a little autonomy to the local governments, that it would allow them to deliver these services more efficiently. However, of late, we have seen a clawing back of those powers, a reversal of the decentralization policy. And we're all seeing the negative effects associated with this, because service delivery at the moment is suffering. And what we are saying is that the government needs to reverse this policy so that it gives the local urban authorities sufficient autonomy, not just the financial autonomy, but sufficient autonomy, okay, to plan and implement, okay, service delivery. And in as far as finance revenue is collected, local revenue, we are saying that these urban authorities need to be allowed to collect the revenue and also use it, spend it as they see fit, because they know the priorities of their respective urban areas. At the moment, financial system, there are delays in disbursement of funds from the central government because you collect it, you send it to government, and then you have to beg for it back. And when you get it back, you may not get it in the quantities that you requested, and there are also delays in disbursing that money back to the local governments. And this is simply untenable and unsustainable. We need to make sure that these urban authorities have sufficient financial autonomy to collect, plan, and spend the money that they're collecting. That is what's happening everywhere in the world. Why should it happen differently here in Uganda? So locally collected revenue should be utilized at local level, following the guidelines above, since this will enable the urban expansion to move forward. Then there is inequitable distribution of funds. Cities remit different amounts, but the central government does not consider the proportions when disbursing these funds. So what we are proposing is the Minister of Finance should come up with a clear formula fused for allocating resources to different urban authorities. I've already said that they already have a formula where they consider land, they consider population, area, poverty index. But we also need to factor in the development aspects, so the development needs of the different urban areas, because the needs of the city of Mbale are going to be different from the needs of the city of Arua. So this needs to be factored in. We also need to look at the facilities that already are obtaining in certain cities. The needs of, as I've already said, the needs of Arua may be different from the needs of Mbale. So we need to factor in what exactly does Arua need, and what does Jinja need, and what does Mbale need, so that when you are disbursing these funds, you take into consideration the requirements of that particular city. We have also said that we should also look at the capacity of that particular city to generate revenue. How much are they contributing to the national coffers, so that it's in line with what they get back. And as I've said, we have already proposed that a certain percentage of corporate tax should be retained at the local level in order to support service delivery in that particular urban area. The formula for allocation of funds is not clear. As we've already said, this needs to be streamlined. And then we talked about local revenue sources and collection should be enhanced. Agency fees must be implemented. There is already a law that local authorities support government in collection of certain fees. And these, in collection of these fees, the local authorities do earn a percentage. Agency fees catered for 1% of the Local Governments Act, cap to 45. This needs to be implemented. It's already there in the law, but it's not being implemented. We talked about resource allocation formula to be considered. It is very unfair and does not promote equity in development. It does not also take into account how much you're contributing to the national coffers. It is akin to milking a cow without feeding it. Then we said creation of municipal development funds to support urban areas in capital development projects. Now, this is there is a proposal. It's not a proposal. There is a municipal development fund project that is being implemented by United Cities and Local Governments of Africa, supported by United Nations Capital Development Fund. And we think that the urban authorities and the central governments should support the creation of municipal development funds in all these developing countries in Africa, so that the urban authorities, should they have a project that requires funding for implementation, can borrow money, implement the project and pay back over a period of time. That is the Municipal Development Fund. We talked about government projects to inject more funds in the Project Facilitation Fund to help urban projects. We said cities should consider the effect of land-based revenue resources, 100% automated revenue-based systems that will improve compliance and efficiency. And we were given an example of the city of Lagos that was able to collect $1 billion in a year because of automation. So we need to develop and adopt automation of our revenue collection centers. We need to invest in physical planning department as it has the opportunity to enhance revenue collection. So overall, next page, please. Next page, and I'm summing up. Overall, key points to note. Methodology to urban expansion needs to be developed so that all cities can implement it in a uniform manner with contextualization where necessary. 2, a lot of hands-on support for the city staff to be able to adapt and implement. That means we need to do capacity building for our technical staff. Planning needs to include forecasting decades ahead. We've been already talking about 30 to 50 years, that we need to project, we need to envisage, we need to have a vision of how our cities are going to look like in 30 years. What are the envisaged challenges? How are they going to look like? And we need to plan not for now, but for the future, if we are going to cater sustainably in this urban expansion program. We've also said that Minister of Lands, Housing and Urban Development should consider housing, the housing element for cities, that we need to do affordable housing in all these new cities that we're developing, because as the population goes up, we need to provide shelter for them. And we know that the population very often, including even developed countries, they do not have the capacity to buy houses outright. Now, if you can't buy a house outright in the United States of America, how on earth do you expect somebody from Uganda to be able to buy a house outright? We should have mortgage facilities, build the houses with the support of the banks, and allow people to pay for these houses over a 15, 20-year program. It's a no-brainer, and you're not reinventing the wheel. But we need to address the issue of housing. Other general recommendations, I'll zoom through them very quickly. We need to decongest the cities and extend essential services to the periphery of the city. Okay, we need to decongest the center of the cities by developing the metropolis of the cities. That is the periphery of the cities. For example, for the city of Kampala, if you're going to decongest it, you need to focus now on the neighboring municipalities of Entebbe, of Nansana, of Chira, and of Mukono. If you can provide the same services in Mukono, okay, that you're providing in the center of the city, then there is no need for somebody to move from Mukono to come to the city center. 2, we need to support the LED policy by supporting the Juakalis. I've already talked about the urban poverty eradication scheme, which we believe that will create employment for the youth in the cities by equipping them with the skills to become job creators as opposed to job seekers. Extend division offices to the periphery of the city, basically decentralize some of these services out there so as to extend services. Polycentric planning as opposed to monocentric planning, I've already talked about that. We need to have an urban physical grant, a conditional grant for physical development, for compensation, street lighting, and so on and so forth. Physical planning is one of the core, is the core of the city's expansion and development and needs to be supported. Cities should be given financial autonomy to enhance their functionality. We said that. Minimum development service areas For example, universities for urban areas, there should be a minimum service package facility. Basically, what we're saying is that we need to have a minimum development program for every urban area that has been designated as a city. What is the baseline? Where do you start from? It will be foolhardy to have a city without a hospital, okay, of a standard of Molago. You cannot have a city without an airport, without a transport terminal, without a university. So some of these basic services must be a must-have in all the cities that we're developing. And we should have a similar standard also for municipalities, so that we have, when you talk about a municipality, there is a minimum level of service delivery and facilities that are expected to be in that municipality. And finally, we said that we deliberate policies to encourage equitable industrial distribution in secondary cities. We need to create employment in these cities. And one of the things that we need to address is the issue of industrialization. So we need to make sure that that is catered for. The government of Uganda has created 15 cities. The urban expansion program seeks to support planning of these secondary cities. The cities we want should be functional, livable, resilient, sustainable, and should meet SDG number 11. Gaps affecting cities cut across policy, legal, institutional, and financial frameworks. And we are thinking that some of these issues that we have discussed and the proposals and recommendations we have made, if implemented, will go a long way in facilitating the urban expansion planning that we're talking about. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you very much, Mayor of Jinja. We always know that you will represent the cities in your country in the best way ever. We could hear today not only how extensively you have been discussing in these 3 hours in the morning. It's quite impressive of what the 5 secondary cities brought together, and we could see how much work was going on. But I think you went even beyond that and represented what is needed from the central government and at the local level to really bring development to your cities. Now, before I collect 1 or 2 questions in Addis and in Kampala, I'd like to give the floor also to Patrick to a bit filter out of the presentation of the mayor and the work of the cities this morning, to filter a little bit out what is specifically relevant for the urban expansion approach that we are doing. There was so much in this presentation which really goes from political solution to economic development. And now over the next 8-9 months, we will work together with Jinja and the other 3 cities in Uganda on this very specific element of urban expansion planning. So please, over to you, Patrick, to a little bit reflect on where you see the opportunities for this approach to make room for rural urban migrants, for the natural growth, and how this can be addressed over the next couple of months.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And I completely agree with you, Brigitte. This was a very comprehensive, one would almost say a platform for urban development in Uganda. I think that the depth of the analysis and the clarity of vision is something that we can, I imagine, look forward to seeing more of when the mayor is in parliament, if we're so lucky as to have that development. I think part of knowing about something is knowing what you don't know. And I would just like to start by saying that I haven't been able to visit Uganda. So unfortunately, my work in the country coincided with the beginning of the pandemic. And although I would very much like to be there right now, especially considering the way that we're falling into winter here in New York, I want to be transparent with you all about the boundaries of what I know and what I don't know. So with that in mind, I'm going to say a bit about urban expansion and about how we can utilize some of the reforms that are being proposed for that purpose. But I'd like to just give a little bit more context so that we can understand why exactly we're asking for urban expansion to be prioritized, since it's clear that there are many areas that urgently need attention in the urban sector in Uganda. And in essence, what we're doing is we're saying, yes, we know that there's all these other issues, but we think it's really important that you do this first. So I think it's easy to sort of sit in our offices and tell ourselves a story about growth and development that says that we can control it, and that we can decide how things go in our cities, and we can, you know, create the Arua entertainment and industrial and tech zone, or that we can do what my city is trying to do and have an entertainment district. You know, we can tell ourselves stories about how growth goes, but aside from these stories that we tell ourselves, there's also evidence, and the evidence is very clear. You know, worldwide, 78% of the population growth between 1990 and 2015 came through urban expansion, and only 22% was accommodated through densification. This is a piece of evidence that should tell us something about what the possibilities are for accommodating population growth through densification. And you can look at the data and you can see that there are almost no cities that disrupted that trend, and the ones that were able to do it were cities that are growing very slowly and that have a lot of money. Now, populations today are growing even faster than they were between 1990 and 2015. We're in a period of time that's like the last great doubling. You know, this is the last time that the global urban population is going to double before the human population levels off. So, you know, I can tell you this, and maybe you believe it and maybe you don't, but you can get in a car and drive to the edge of the city, any city in Uganda, any city in Ethiopia. You can see this with your eyes. It's very clear. Growth is taking place through expansion. I also want to contextualize this by saying that we're in a really unique moment. So urbanization has a trajectory. In most countries in the world, urbanization is done. The population has shifted from being rural to being urban. The migration has happened. For me, in my life, this was something that happened to my grandparents. My grandparents all grew up on farms, and they all died in cities. But by the time they were elderly, they had moved to cities. Their children were born in cities, and their parents and grandparents had all spent their lives in farms. So this is something that happens, and then it's over. In 50 to 80 years, urbanization will be complete everywhere, including in Uganda. And right now we're going through the most rapid period. So if the experiences of other countries are any indicator, that means that the cities that we're building now are actually the cities that we're going to be living with for hundreds of years after now, which means it's extremely important that we get it right in this moment. Like, the challenge of our generation is a big challenge. So what does it mean to get it right? Well, if we understand urbanization as the process of building cities, which are physical human artifacts, it seems clear that there are some things that we absolutely have to do first, other things that we can do second, other things that we can do third and fourth and down the line. In other words, we have to prioritize because we don't have the ability to do everything. Now, if you were building a city from scratch, you would start by laying out the blocks and roads. And this is what we are proposing to do. And why do we propose this as the thing that should be the priority in this moment when there are so many other pressing needs? Well, because growth of the population requires land. And this is especially true when you're considering economic development with commercial and industrial areas that need space to grow. And even more important when we're considering rural to urban migration and social development. And this comes back to an issue that the mayor touched on several times, and which I think is really, really important. And that is the challenge of affordable housing. Now, again, when we think about affordable housing, we have data and evidence. And what the data and evidence show us is that big, broad-based affordable housing programs led by governments usually are unsuccessful, but there are strategies that we can use that are decentralized, that empower individuals, that actually are very successful in providing housing. And it comes back to a simple fact, which is that poor people have been building their own homes for thousands of years. And the thing that prevents a rural to urban migrant or an urban poor person from being housed is not the lack of a house, it's the lack of land on which they can build a house. If we want to house the poor successfully in developing countries at scale, we need to make land affordable. And the affordability of land is determined by the supply of land. And the supply of land is determined by its accessibility, which brings us again back to the idea of investing in arterial roads, developing the networks of blocks and roads, because that is what's going to keep land affordable affordable for industrial development, affordable for migrants, affordable for housing. And the way that people who can't access finance access housing is by building incrementally. And as far as I can tell, the bias against incremental development is primarily aesthetic. This is something that works well in countries around the world. Now, the risk of failing to plan for urban expansion is asymmetric. So the cost of providing services in areas that were never planned can be 3 to 9 times higher than providing services in planned areas. And it's also disastrously expensive to try to put arterial roads through existing settlements, displacing people. As we've mentioned here, this is something that not only is politically very difficult, it's just practically very, very costly. And in practice, it almost never happens. So with what result? Well, in areas that don't have these networks, it's more difficult to put in public transportation and services, which all run on the network of arterial roads. It's more difficult to walk and cycle because you don't have orderly block layouts. More difficult for persons to access other areas of the city, which means it impedes the formation of a metropolitan labor market, a metropolitan housing market, which means it's harder for people to access employment and education. And in the long run, failing to prepare peripheries for urban growth depresses the trajectory of development. Despite other investments that are made, this can be a real roadblock. Now, the good news is, if we're able to focus on this one task, the data that we need is simpler than you'd think. And this has a lot to do with scale. Because we're dealing with something that's an asymmetric risk, it means it's actually much more consequential if you underplan than if you overplan. So imagine this exercise, for example. What we need to do is identify a mechanism for securing the arterial road rights-of-ways in the expansion area of the city. Now, once we've identified that mechanism, we're talking again, as I mentioned earlier, we're talking about securing a few hundred hectares of land in total. So if we secure too much, say, if we overplan the arterial roads, then we just won't build them. Like, there won't be demand. We'll have secured the land, but we won't make the investments unnecessarily. We're not going to have a scenario where there are 30-meter wide roads paved with streetlights sitting out in the middle of a cornfield. But if we fail to secure those rights of ways now, and then we need them in 10 years, we can't get them. We won't be able to do it. So it's okay for us to take general data, forecast a trend, and then kind of round up. Like, this is actually a safe practice, because we don't know how much exactly our cities are going to grow, but we do know that some cities grow a lot. You take a city like, well, that's a bad example. But I was going to use the example of New York. New York increased in area 9-fold in 30 years in one period of time. So let's just keep in mind, it's possible for cities to grow very fast. So I think within this smorgasbord of urban reforms, I would suggest that we prioritize in the near term the ones that capacitate physical planning and that capacitate the municipal administration to address this key issue of securing arterial road corridors in the expansion area. And then once we've developed this framework or skeleton for the city to grow into, we know that we can bring in a lot of the other elements later down the line. And this is especially true if we're able to use this urban growth process as a source of revenue generation, which I think and hope that we'll be able to do. Now, this is good. This prioritization is good, because otherwise you have so many things on the agenda that it seems overwhelming. If you're focused on just one thing, then you can concentrate your resources. You're more likely to achieve it. That doesn't mean that we have to give up a bigger vision for how our cities can be. It just means that we want to sort of make it a little more bite-sized. So I welcome all comments, and I appreciate the opportunity to give some response to this really excellent urban reform agenda that I look forward to seeing implemented.
Thank you very much, Patrick, for reflecting on the mayor's input and the input of all the cities that have worked in the morning on preparing this. Dear audience on the virtual space and also in Addis and in Kampala, we have already heard from the participants in Addis that they would like to have the presentations which the mayor just gave now, with this very detailed overview already on the way forward and also on the recommendation. So we are going to share all the material with the participants and those in the virtual audience. Please let us know via the chat if you would like to have them as well. We see that there might be more room and need to discuss also for the participants in Addis. So we will first send the material, and then if later on are questions, we will connect them with the cities in Uganda as well. For the Ugandan participants, please use the informal room after this meeting to further discuss also with the panelists, because we would like to now move to the final session of the day, which will be the concluding session. We have now heard what is going on in the cities, what you have discussed, and in this final minutes of the day, we would like to hear also in sum how you're going to take this forward. If the teams in Addis are ready, I would like to first call on the speaker in Addis to represent the way forward in 2-5 minutes, and where you would like to set the priorities for the coming months and years. Over to Addis, please.
Okay, thank you very much. My name is Gabayo. I came from Dredo. I want to say some points about the main windows, the way forward points about Dredo city and Somaliland. Okay, shall we put this one? Because the main takeaways points about our cities is managing urban expansion has critical importance for the sustainable orderly growth cities. The second point is the experience from Ethiopian cities, just 4 cities, Hawassa, Bahar Dar, Makale, and Adama. These are important resources to be inspired, lesson and experience for Ethiopian cities to start preparing their long-term expansion of plan. The third point is there are always limitations in terms of mandates and the capacities. However, it is important to take into existing potential and the capacities to that will be enabled to us to start planning. This is long-term in the development of our cities. The gaps can be filled as we go along, and the long-term solutions can be facilitated. The fourth point is commitment in the leadership is for urban development and orderly expansion of cities are critical success. Another point is utilizing existing legal provisions, mandate, expertise in our disposals. We are prepared to start the urban expansion planning process, forming an interdisciplinary from the relevant departments of the cities is the next step. For example, Trero has already formed an urban expansion team that will be started working on expansion plan. A meeting with the cities alliance team will be followed to be trained, and the core team will on the urban expansion planning methodologies. The discussion and the consultation with the stakeholders and the community are integral parts of the expansion planning process. We will work with academic institutions and vocational training centers to mobilize expertise and the capacity for the preparation of urban expansion plans. The plan should be considered from the cities alliance and other development partners. Having some mandate and the resources are critical success factors for the preparation and the implementation on our urban expansions plans. In this regional and the dialogue, this topics was discussed extensively to address the issues of suggest. There are some solutions. This puts the solutions in immediate solution in the middle and the long-term solutions. Among the middle and the long-term solutions, enhance autonomy and the mandates of the cities, and the resources executed their mandate can be facilitated by the relevant authorities. The second immediate solutions are the city should be utilize the resources as the hardest to start urban expansion planning. The second point is the possibilities of secured capacity development, support staffing, equipment, strategy development. It is that facilitate the preparation and the implementation of urban expansion. Thank you very much. But some points about all points are similar with the Dreva and Somaliland. But when it comes to the Somaliland, the cities in Somaliland are ready for engagement and implement the urban expansion. It has not yet been implemented, but they are ready for the discussion, experience sharing for the City Alliance partnership in the Alliance. Thank you very much.
Thank you
Thank you,
very much.
Gabriel. Yeah,
Thank you
back to
very much, Mr. Tilalum, Head of Land Management in Dire Dawa, for representing Ethiopia and also for summing up the way forward for Somaliland. I think what I take away from the dialogue in Addis is that you see it as an important step forward to plan for urban expansion. You see that you already have cities in Ethiopia with whom you can exchange experiences. You mentioned that there will always be limitations in terms of mandate and in terms of capacities. But I think as we have discussed throughout the 2 days, we will be able to fill the gaps as we go ahead, not having everything fixed before we start, and that it needs political leadership, and be certain that the international community now today, with the great support of Switzerland and the Swiss Development Agency, is ready to accompany you for the next 1 year. Now I would like to hand over to the delegation in Kampala. I hope you will be ready. And I think I have the pleasure to invite the Mayor of Koboko to the floor to deliver the recommendations and the way forward for the delegation in Kampala and Uganda.
To read the summary of what we have in what we're supposed to take away from Kampala, Uganda. At the first regional dialogue that was first convened on the 23rd and 24th of November 2020, that was attended by the technical committee of Mbale, Arua, and Jinja, and representatives of Ministry of Land, Housing and Urban Development, Ministry of Local Government, and the Urban Authority Association of Uganda. The participants resolved as follows: with the participants present, noting the high rate of urbanization in the face of inadequate capacity to plan for sustainable and inclusive urban development, with the participants also aware of the opportunity presented by the creation of the new cities in the country, we participants are appreciative of the support provided by the Cities Alliance for urban expansion planning. Do hereby resolve: 1, to adopt and support the implementation of urban expansion planning approach to secure order development of our cities. 2, we resolve to undertake capacity development initiatives in cities in terms of human resource development, equipment, data, and spatial information resources to enhance urban planning. 3, we hereby resolve to spearhead appropriate reforms to policy, legal, institutional, and financial frameworks for effective urban expansion planning. 4, we resolve to kickstart the preparation of urban expansion plans in our cities without any further delay. And 5, we hereby resolve to intensively engage, sensitize, and educate the city stakeholders, especially landowners and communities, about the benefits of urban expansion planning to secure full cooperation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mayor from Koboko. Pleasure to having you on the floor today and to seeing you part of this community now as well. We are looking forward to the next months to work with the cities in Uganda and to put these recommendations into action. Thank you very much to both venues. My final invitation now goes back to the virtual space. We have with us a representative from UCLG. We have Mr. Lionel Nazamba. He is the Charge de Mission for Migration at the United Cities and Local Governments for Africa. Now, in the speeches of the mayors this afternoon, we have heard a lot about autonomy and decentralization. And I think UCLG can also speak to this. Dear Lionel, over to you for the final remarks of this day. Have we lost Lionel? Now that would be our first participant whom we have lost in these 2 days.
Yes, it would look like we've lost Lionel.
Ah, that is a pity. That is the real pity, dear participants. We missed now the opportunity to hear back from UCLG. I'm sure that Lionel was ready to speak to all of you. It's a great opportunity for UCLG Africa to have so many 12 secondary cities presented today. But I see him not connecting. All right, then I think from our side, this brings us to the final concluding remarks. It will be my pleasure to deliver those to you. It was 2 very eventful 2 days. As I have started yesterday, it took us a lot of preparation. It took you a lot of preparation and adjustment of your plans to actually make this happen. We had many eventful events, both from a health perspective and a political perspective in all of our participating countries. So I think for us, it was on Monday just a great relief to see you all present in Addis and Kampala. And it was a pleasure for us to observe how this exchange among us and among you actually then took place. Now, from our side, we found it very enriching to see how much applied knowledge is in the region. We have cities and ministries that shared their knowledge over these 2 days. And it was not just knowledge. For us, it was important. This is applied knowledge. You have tested these approaches, you have made experience, and it's actually you who can then bring this experience back to your cities and to contextualize to your specific context, political, economic, and population-wise. Now, for us, this has given us the incentives to convene you. We knew about this knowledge, and we have a pleasure that this could take place. We also feel that this regional dialogue was an energizer. It was an energizer for the 9 cities with whom we started the cooperation over the past weeks and months. I think it gives all the 9 cities a moment to really see it can happen. It has happened in other countries. And I think in these 2 days, we also saw a lot of political will and support by the different mayors and line ministries to make this happen. And we are very pleased about that. We had one comment from one of the audience. This was yesterday, and it was about there are no blanket solutions. And this is exactly right. We would not need to do this. We don't need to convene all of you if there would be a blanket solution, right? We could write a textbook and we could just follow it. But this is not how it is. What we share today are experiences, recommendations, approaches, and it's you and the respective cities who can choose what makes sense for you in your context. Now, in a year from now, we will see us again. And in a year from now, all the 9 partner cities from Somaliland, Uganda, and Ethiopia will have done their urban expansion planning. We are looking forward to these coming months to work with you. And we are also looking forward to, in a 1 year's time, to actually then exchange on what has happened and to share the results. With this, I would like to thank all the speakers who have contributed over the last 2 days. A big thank you to the panelists, to the presenters. Big thank you to the participants who have actively engaged, particularly in today's morning session, and prepared the plan forward. A big thank you to the moderators in Ethiopia, to Tingirtu Chikchiga University, Sirigera, Ephraim, Fitsum, and the local comms team. Big thank you back to Kampala, to Semambala, to Didas and the comms company who managed to make this all happen. And eventually, I have to thank my colleagues who are also here in the virtual space today. First and foremost, to Hendrik and to Anais, who really made this all happen, that we all could convene in these two places. To Maurice and to Charlotte, who also joins us today in a visual, who took charge of all the IT and comms to connect us through this hybrid event. With this, I close this session. I thank you to all the participants, and I'm very much looking forward to our future cooperation. A big thank you to all, and still enjoy the informal space in the two venues. Bye from Brussels.
So we'll have a group photo for departure, and we'll have also a tea and coffee outside.
Enjoy the tea and coffee, also in Kampala. Bye-bye from us.
Yeah, so colleagues, I think we have formally come to the end of our dialogue, but I think this just marks the beginning. Technical teams to make projections for the data